The Senate will come to order. The senators will please take their seats. The senators and all in attendance, please stand and be led in prayer by the senator from Fauquier, Senator Vogel.
Thank you, Madam President. And also, thank you to Senator Bell and Senator Spruill and Senator Pillion for the lovely Valentine's gifts on some of our desks, and to whomever it is that gave Madam Clerk this giant white bear. Yes. And now can we bow our heads? Heavenly Father, we give thanks for the many blessings you have bestowed on us, this Commonwealth, and this body. We humbly seek your continued blessings on all that we do in support of democracy and the people of this Commonwealth. May our hearts be open to one another and filled with your Spirit as we seek to engage in our civic responsibilities in a manner that is respectful of one another and in the service of others. Help us to serve with humility, compassion, and love. Protect our families, our Senate staff, and our friends who support us so that we may do this work. Most especially, I remember our beloved Ben Chafin today and every day, as he is not with us in body but in spirit in this Senate session, and I ask your blessing on his family. We ask this in the Lord's name. Amen.
Amen. We will be led in prayer, but I'm sorry. We'll be led in the Pledge of Allegiance by Abigail Smalley. I just want to make sure I pronounce her name correctly.
I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Abigail. I just did not want to mispronounce your name. The senator from James City County, Senator Norman.
Do we have anybody missing today, Susan?
Everybody's here? Okay.
Just go to the roll call.
The clerk will do the roll call. Madam Clerk, will you call the roll? All those in present, vote aye. Madam Clerk, close the roll.
You have a quorum, Madam President. Senate Journal for Thursday, February 11th, 2021.
The senator from Northern Fairfax, Senator Saslaw. Senator Howell. Move that the reading of the journal be waived. All in favor of waiving the reading of the journal will record their votes aye, and those opposed vote no. Are the senators ready to vote? Have all the senators voted? Do any senator desire to change their vote? The clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 31, noes 5.
Ayes 31, noes 5. The reading of the journal is waived. The clerk will report any communications from the House of Delegates.
We do not have any, Madam President.
That makes it a lot easier. The clerk will report any communications from the governor.
We do have a communication from His Excellency the Governor. Dear Senator Stanley, he's not here.
Move to waive the reading.
No.
Oh my goodness.
Go by temporarily.
The reading of the communication from the governor will go by temporarily. Now I need to call on the senior senator from Fairfax, Senator Saslaw.
Madam President, I would now move that we stand in recess for 1 hour so that we can receive a briefing from the Senate Finance staff.
Without objection, the Senate will stand in recess for 1 hour.
Madam Chair, members of the Senate, we are going to try to go through this briefing quickly to give you an idea of what's in the committee budget, and we will pause at the end of each section for questions, unless Madam Chair would want us to do otherwise. All right. If you turn to slide 4, just a look at the budget priorities of the committee's budget. Again, it was back to investments in the people of Virginia, and more specifically, also response to the COVID-19 pandemic. In education, this includes such items as no loss funding for K-12 enrollment, learning loss funding, which includes things like summer learning, exceptional ed, etc. Additional support positions, specifically related to Senator McClellan's bill, 3 additional support positions back. G3 initiative in higher education, and flexible higher education funding, which also includes operating and financial aid. In health and human resources, this includes adding waiver slots and one-time supports, increasing personal care attendant rates, and supporting max vaccination efforts. There was some swapping of general funds with additional federal dollars that came from the additional stimulus package. Under employee compensation, increases were provided for state and state-supported locals, state police troopers, Capitol police officers, and a few other targeted actions. In economic development, this included such items as tax relief to businesses. As you might remember, the committee spent a long time talking about conformity and what to do there. Small business grants, access to low-cost credit for businesses impacted by the pandemic, housing, and broadband. This was also done while thinking about structural balance. This includes retaining what was in the introduced budget, that $650 million deposit to the Revenue Reserve Fund, a payment of $100 million that we discussed previously when we covered the introduced budget to VRS, and then there's some contingent funding that when additional revenue came in would make additional payments to VRS of $200 million. There was cash for maintenance reserve, which was one time, and then a number of other one-time items across the various secretariats. Turning to slide 5, Just a quick overview of the changes to the resources. You'll see that started at about $24 billion in the first year and $23 in the second year. It's at $1.1 billion higher than it was in Chapter 56, which you did in November. It assumes $221 million in revenue reductions to fund income tax relief to both individuals and businesses related to conformity, and that's with the Federal CARES Act and then that Consolidated Appropriations Act, which was the second stimulus bill. It includes about $30 million for a downward adjustment to the Virginia Housing Opportunity Tax Credit, some positive of almost $22 million for ABC profits. There's additional revenue reduction of $10 million to fund the sales and use tax exemptions for businesses purchasing personal protective equipment, and then some additional adjustments related to agricultural credits and sales taxes on accommodations fees. Turning to slide 6, this is just a tabular view of the various actions, starting with Chapter 56, the introduced budget, Senate Bill 1100, and then 1100 plus the amendments from the committee. The important thing to note is with the changes in resources up and down, you'll see the negative is slightly higher in the committee amendments at 198.5, which changes the unappropriated balance from 51.1 to 52.7. Turning to slide 7, just a quick discussion on tax conformity. There were Forgiven Paycheck Protection Program, or the PPP loans. Those are excluded for income for purposes of the Virginia income tax. You partially conform with respect to the deductibility of expenses funded with those forgiven PPP loans by allowing both individuals and corporate taxpayers up to $100,000 in deductions on their Virginia tax return for tax year 2020. You provide additional income tax subtractions of up to $100,000 in 2020 for individual and corporate taxpayers who were recipients of the Rebuild Virginia grants as well. It also conforms to several other federal tax provisions that are favorable to Virginia taxpayers, such as enhanced deductions for charitable purposes. Slide 8, I'll just quickly mention there are 2 language amendments in the package of amendments related to tax policy. The first is the Joint Subcommittee on Tax Policy that Senator Howe mentioned several times during the committee meetings, which would establish a 12-member joint subcommittee between the Finance Committee members and members of House Appropriations and House Finance. And that would look to potential changes to Virginia's tax policy. There's also an amendment related to corporate income tax informational reporting, and then that has to do with unitary combined net income of that group. That covers slide 8. Slide 9 is just a look at changes to the CARES Act allocations. You might remember we covered that for the introduced budget, and this has several slight changes as well in the package of amendments, including additional higher ed cleaning, telework, virtual education, and COVID costs, et cetera, and some changes related to vaccinations. Madam Chair, that completes my portion of the presentation. If there are questions.
Are there any questions for April?
Yeah, Madam Chair.
Senator Elton.
It's an excellent presentation. I was just wondering, is that available on the Senate Finance and Appropriations website?
It is, and you should also have a hard copy on your desk as well that we passed out earlier.
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Who is it?
Senator DeSteff.
Oh, Senator DeSteff.
Just one quick question on slide 7. What would complete conformity, what would that, the number on that be, please?
If you're talking about all provisions, it was upwards of almost $900 million. I believe if you're just talking about the PPP, it's about $350, is that correct? To $500 million.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members. On slide 11, in this area of the budget, much of the focus has been on expanding access to affordable housing and broadband and providing support for COVID-impacted business. Some of the key features include $100 million over the biennium for the Housing Trust Fund, just under $50 million each year for broadband infrastructure grants through the Virginia Telecommunication Initiative, or VADI, $25 million from revenues collected from so-called gray machines to provide a new round of small business grants through the Rebuild Virginia program. There's also $10 million to capitalize a new fund to provide a source of responsible low-cost credit for COVID-impacted businesses through Virginia's network of community development financial institutions. If we can move to the next slide, please. These next slides show the increases or decreases included in the governor's proposed budget and any committee amendments and the net change. In the first row, you'll see that the governor proposed increasing deposits to the Housing Trust Fund by $40.7 million. Now, that proposed funding in the first year included an additional $15.7 million that was designated to continue the Virginia Rent and Mortgage Relief Program whenever monies from the Coronavirus Relief Fund expire. Now, the committee amendments removed this increase in general fund appropriations for the Virginia Rent and Mortgage Relief Program and instead includes language that directs the use of federal funds to continue the program. Even with this reduction, the committee budget provides $110 million over the biennium for the Housing Trust Fund. The committee budget endorses the governor's proposal to increase funding for broadband by $15 million, which brings the total to just under $50 million a year. The committee budget also establishes, as I mentioned earlier, the Virginia CDFI Fund within the Department of Housing and Community Development and provides $10 million to capitalize the fund. The next three items are amendments in the introduced budget that the committee endorses, including extending the eviction prevention program at DHCD, expanding the Main Street program to reach more small businesses through community business launch grants, and increased support for CERCAP, which is an organization that helps low-income communities with water and wastewater projects. There's also an amendment for $500,000 to assist communities within the boundaries of the Lenawisco and Cumberland Plateau Planning District Commissions with education and telehealth initiatives. Three more amendments on this slide are second-year restorations of items that were funded in Chapter 1289 but were unallotted and then reduced in Chapter 56. Those are noted with asterisks. And the last item on this page is a language amendment that directs the Department of Housing and Community Development to create a pilot program within the VADI program with awards not to exceed 10% of total available funds in FY22, to which public broadband authorities may apply without investment from the private sector, and this was a recommendation of the Broadband Advisory Council. Next slide, please. In economic development, I'll draw your attention to two items of interest on this slide. The first relates to a recent economic development project announcement. Just less than 2 weeks ago, Governor Northam announced that CMA CGM Group will retain its North American headquarters in Norfolk and create an additional 400 jobs in the Commonwealth. This involves an economic development incentive package that the Major Employment and Investment, or MEI, Project Approval Commission endorsed. It is subject to approval by the General Assembly. This amendment represents the first installment of a $9.5 million custom performance grant. I'll also just point out that the committee budget includes $2.1 million for tourism promotion. This is in accordance with Senate Bill 1398. Moving to the next slide, there are several actions listed here. Most of these were included in the introduced budget, so I'll just highlight a few items. The first item at the top of the table, when the governor first released his budget proposal, the Commonwealth anticipated owing $7.5 million in interest on cash advances from the federal government for unemployment insurance benefits payments. However, federal COVID relief legislation enacted after the governor's budget was prepared waived interest on borrowing through March 31st. So the Virginia Employment Commission now estimates that the interest due will be approximately $750,000. The Senate budget maintains the governor's recommendation to provide $15 million in general fund support for the Virginia Employment Commission related to contract labor, customer service support, and IT upgrades. I'll also just point out that there's a language amendment that's consistent with Senate Bill 1369 that passed the Senate. This amendment amends the definition of small businesses to include certain cooperative associations for purposes of programs for the Department of Small Business and Supplier Diversity and for the Public Procurement Act. If we can move to the next slide, please. Lastly, on this slide, you'll see the $25 million non-general fund amendment I mentioned earlier for Rebuild Virginia grants, as well as three language amendments. The first amendment removes the one-time restriction from the language around municipal utility relief. The second language amendment adds additional relief for Phase 2 utility customers, extending from September 30 to December 30, the date by which customers who are in arrears may qualify for forgiveness. And the last item updates budget language to clarify the requirements for landlords and tenants to apply for rental assistance prior to any evictions-related action occurring. It also removes the 45-day deadline for approval of a pending application. And this is intended to clear up some confusion caused by the existing language around whether and when a landlord must apply for rental assistance. That completes the summary for Commerce and Trade. I know I went quickly, Madam Chair, so if there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Charles. Are there any questions for Charles? Not seeing any. Thank you.
Thank
Next
you.
up is higher education. Sarah.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Picking up on slide 17 is a summary of the actions related to higher education. As you recall, the introduced budget in this area reflected a net decrease over the 2 years of almost $175 million, primarily because the introduced budget distributed to the agencies the central budget reductions that had been adopted in Chapter 56. The introduced budget also proposed about roughly $100 million worth of restorations and just under $10 million in new spending. The committee amendments result in a net increase of $78.4 million general funds in addition compared to the introduced budget, including $73.5 million in FY22, continuing the first-year funding from the special session for public institutions of higher education as flexible funding to be used for either financial aid, operations, or other impacts of COVID. And the amendments also allocate an additional $17.3 million in federal CRF, Coronavirus Relief Fund funding for testing. The amendments maintain the proposed restoration of $30 million for need-based financial aid and also direct $22 million of the new federal Gear 2 funding also to financial aid. The amendments maintain $36 million for the new G3 Last Dollar Plus Community College Workforce Initiative pursuant to Senator Salazar's bill, and the amendments also add $5 million for advisors to improve student success in this initiative and other programs at community colleges. The other amendments primarily focus on budget restorations and health-related initiatives and are detailed on the following pages. Next slide. The first table focuses on those amendments related to financial aid. And the setup again is the first column is the changes proposed in the introduced budget. Next is the committee's actions, and then the net total. I've already mentioned the first two, the G3 and need-based aid. The third row shows the committee maintaining the restoration of the $7.9 million increase the second year for tuition assistance grants to students at public nonprofit institutions. And there is no change proposed, money or language, to this item in the amendments. It maintains the previous language, which references up to $4,000 grants by the second year. The next two rows reflect the adjustment to first-year funding for the new affordability initiatives at Norfolk State University and Virginia State University, reflecting the delay in getting started this school year, and also allow for the funding to be released within the current year. And then the last row is some additional funding for the Virginia Military Survivors Independence Stipend Program, reflecting anticipated participation levels. Next slide reflects proposed amendments related to other restorations other than those related to the financial aid. And the first has to do with Massey Cancer Center at Virginia Commonwealth University. The committee's amendments provide an increase of $2.5 million the second year, which is consistent with the conference report from the 2020 regular session, as Massey Cancer Center pursues NCI, National Cancer Center Institute designation, and defers the first-year funding that had been proposed in the introduced budget. The next three lines maintain the introduced amounts that you're familiar with for George Mason University, ODU, and the restored amounts for Norfolk State University and Virginia State University. On the fifth line down begins a few of the committee amendments, including restoring $2 million at Radford University related to equalizing tuition with the recent health sciences merger. This is in addition to funding provided for Radford in a different item, which is $4.9 million, both the FY21 amounts and the second year amounts. The next row shows a combined total of $2.0 million related to funding at the 5 higher education centers. These are restorations, and including the restoration for the Rural IT Apprenticeship Program related to 2019 legislation. The next row is a combined total of $1.8 million, restoring various institution-specific items at those listed. And then for the State Council of Higher Education Virginia, there are restorations of 2 items. One is the Guidance to Post-Secondary Success Initiative, helping students transition to college, and also restoring the funding and language for a cost study, which will look at higher education needs, efficiency, affordability, completion, underrepresented populations, with a work plan due this summer, a preliminary report prior to the next session, and a final report in the summer of 2022. And there are some smaller dollar items at the bottom of that table. And next slide. Our other proposed amendments, the majority of which is the largest, the $73.5 million flexible funding for the institutions. This is in item 262.8, and the distributions for the institutions are listed there. They are the same as the ones from FY21, with the addition of George Mason and ODU, pursuant to the amendment request. This is also the amendment that indicates the allocation of the additional federal funds for testing and for financial aid. And there are also 2 language amendments, 2 language paragraphs in this amendment. One related to procurement advertising, consistent with other areas, and also some flexibility related to athletics, specifically student fees and student funding, so that the calculation of the 5-year rolling average pursuant to legislation in recent years would remove FY20, 21, and 22, given the disproportionate impact on athletics due to the pandemic. The second and third lines maintain the proposed funding for Connected Campus for technology at NSU, $1.5 million for Jefferson Lab, although the second year is not allotted until the governor approves the second year amount. The next several lines are committee amendments providing $1.25 million each for a joint venture with ODU and NSU for a new accredited joint school of public health. Also $1.6 million for a resiliency initiative through cooperative extension at Virginia Tech. $1 million at Christopher Newport University for operations and maintenance costs related to a new facility coming online this summer. And there are several other smaller dollar items at the bottom of this table. And Madam Chair, that completes higher education.
Are there any questions for Sarah? Not seeing any. Next up is Tyler with K-12 and other education.
Moving on to K-12 on slide 22, as you'll remember, the introduced budget proposed a net decrease of $133 million over the biennium for K-12. This was mainly due to the reductions in central appropriations being distributed to direct aid, but also the governor proposed $705 million in policy changes. The committee's amendments result in a net spending of $121.5 million, which reduce the decrease to K-12 to $11.7 million over the biennium. The major general fund spending amendments for K-12 are converting the 2% bonus to a 3% salary increase for teachers, support for 3 specialized support positions for every 1,000 students, and then additional money for instructional activities to address learning loss. Moving to slide 23, those first 2 lines, you see the technical adjustments, then you see the routine updates and forecast changes for enrollments. On line 3, the committee maintains the governor's introduced budget for the no-loss payments to divisions, mainly due to enrollment changes. This is about $514 million. The next line, you see that the committee adds $59.3 million to convert the 2% bonus as introduced to a 3% salary increase in the second year. On line number 6, you see the committee adding $49.2 million to, this is related to Senate Bill 1257, Senator McClellan's bill, the specialized student support positions, 3 for every 1,000 students. This will provide division's flexibility to hire nurses and mental health professionals. Line number 7, you see the committee adding $30 million for learning loss instructional supports. This is summer learning, remedial instructional activities, after school programs. Line number 8, the committee maintains the governor's proposed $26.6 million for additional school counselors. This is a restoration from the 2020 session. There's the restoration of the VPI per pupil amount. And line number 11, the committee reverses the governor's inclusion of Accomack and Northampton school divisions in the cost of competing adjustment. And then in line 12, the committee provides $2.7 million for additional support for Accomack and Northampton for teacher retention efforts. Moving on to slide number 24. On the third row down, there's a restoration of about $600,000 for the Allegheny Covington schools consolidation. The Board of Education recently approved those 2 school divisions to consolidate. Line number 5, the committee adds $300,000 for the VPI Minority Fellowship with the Literacy Lab. Line number 6, there's $300,000 that the committee adds for dual enrollment pilot grants to align high school dual enrollment courses with the Community College Passport and General Studies Diploma. There's $250,000 on line 7 for active learning grants to support active learning for pre-K through 2nd grade. The committee adds $100,000 for a technical enrollment update for one of the governor's schools. Line number 9, you see the committee removing $2.5 million for the school mills expansion. The federal government has waived school mill cost during this school year, so that money is no longer needed. And then in line number 12, the committee removes $15.9 million in the VPI undistributed balance. This money was available because the governor maintained $21 million in the VPI to allow additional flexibility for school divisions to enroll preschoolers after October 1st. And that $5 million was distributed to the divisions for the increased enrollment. Moving on to slide number 25, these are the Department of Education proposed amendments. The committee added $300,000 related to Senate Bill 1288 for IEP oversight. This will allow for a training module on what needs to be included when schools and teachers and school professionals are creating IEPs. And then there's also removing $1.8 million due to Senate Bill 1401, reducing SOL assessments to the federal minimum. Moving to slide 26, the next slide is the K-12 proposed language amendments. The committee allocates $10 million in federal ESSER II. This is the state set-aside funds at DOE to support a diagnostic growth assessment system in the next 2 school years. The committee also allocates $7 million in the federal governor's emergency education relief fund to continue virtual Virginia's expansion costs, which were initiated with CARES Act funding in the next school year. There's a language amendment directing divisions to provide in-person learning options during the next school year. The committee also includes various recommendations on the 2020 JLARC studies on CSA and special education, including reporting for private day schools, teacher training around special education and differentiating education, and then reporting on special education data at the Department of Education. And then there's language directing DOE to convene a work group to make recommendations on school nursing standards. Turning to the last slide, slide 27, the other education, the committee maintains $1 million to support the VMFA's work on Monument Avenue's future. This will support 2 FTEs and add language for development of a plan on Monument's future. The committee also restores $1 million for state aid to local public libraries. The committee provides $500,000 to the Jamestown-Yorktown Foundation to support increasing wages for their staff members, and then also $400,000 at Jamestown-Yorktown Foundation for strategic marketing support to update their website. Madam Chair, that completes K-12 and other ed.
Thank you. Are there questions for Tyler? I hear, yes, Senator Favola.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question. If school systems proceed with summer school, which many systems are, I guess they'll be able to, will they have the flexibility to use some of the dollars that would normally be used in the traditional academic year?
Madam Chair, Senator Favola, yes, and then they also have the committee's amendment, $30 million would also support summer learning options, but it would be flexible on how they spent that money.
Any further question? Hearing none. Thanks, Tyler. Next up is Health and Human Resources. Mike.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So in Health and Human Resources, the focus of the committee was kind of twofold. One, to address some of the additional things that have been unallotted and not restored, as well as looking at the other high priorities in HHR. So you can, as you recall from the introduced budget, there was actually a net decrease of about $374 million general fund. This is mainly due to the enhanced federal match that the states are receiving from the federal stimulus bills that Congress has passed, and those continue to the end of the public health emergency. Committee amendments actually are able to capture some of those additional funds, so you can see that the net decrease in HHR actually goes up to $756 million general fund over the biennium. And there's also additional federal supplants of funds that I'll talk about in just a second. Moving to the next slide, slide 30. This slide just kind of gives you the traditional table that I won't go into detail, but it kind of gives you the details by general fund and non-general fund of the changes for HHR. On slide 31, so the COVID-19 spending in the area of health and human resources, it was heavily concentrated in the mass vaccination program. The governor had put in $89 million. So the federal stimulus bill that Congress passed, basically, and the president signed on December 27th, provides substantial additional federal dollars to the states for vaccine administration, as well as testing and surveillance efforts. So the committee is able to supplant much of this funding with those additional federal funds, as well as some additional other CARES Act funds that were still available in the area of HHR that are being redirected. So all of that $89.3 million is simply shifted to federal funds. Communication needs related to COVID-19, there was $19.6 million in the governor's budget, where the committee supplants most of that. Still leaves about $6.3 million in general fund just in case there aren't sufficient funds to cover it. But it's very likely that additional federal stimulus from Congress will provide additional funds to states for vaccine administration and things of this nature. There's $6.4 million that was included in the introduced budget. That's also related to surveillance at state psychiatric hospitals. That is also supplanted with federal funds as additional testing funds were given to the states. There's an amendment that actually increases from what the governor had proposed of $3.1 million. It adds $5.8 million to strengthen public health disease surveillance. So what this does is this adds an additional epidemiologist and a nurse in all 35 health districts to help strengthen the ability of the 35 health districts and things that come into public health emergencies like we're currently under. There's also money in there for data modeling. This was cut back a little bit, assuming that the last 6 months of the biennium, we may not need the modeling anymore. But if that changes, of course, additional federal funds could probably be reallocated for that purpose. Moving to the next slide, 32, just the major spending items in HHR. The largest one is the first one you can see is in personal care rates. So this helps to address the impact of the minimum wage. As you know, that increases to $9.50 per hour on May 1st of 2021. And then on January 1st of 2022, it increases to $11 per hour. So the personal care attendance that we pay for through Medicaid, at least when they will actually, in order to bring them up to a level where they're paid at least the minimum wage, that had to be reflected in the budget. What the committee did is actually kind of set a level of paying them the lowest level, being paid $1 above the minimum wage, and those dollars kind of reflect that. So it results in a 6.4% increase on May 1st, and then a 14.3% in November 1st in anticipation of the next increase in January. Other amendments, there was $15 million the committee added to support developmental disability waiver providers due to COVID-19. So federal funds have been allocated from the CARES Act for this purpose to specifically support those like day support providers and residential providers. But there are some provider groups such as supportive employment and stuff that have received very little federal assistance. So this is the recognition that the state would actually have to provide some one-time support to keep those providers afloat until the point that the public health emergency ends and their service levels can return to normal and the waiver services can return to normal. There's additional funding that expands the Famous Moms program. So this is paid for from the Children's Health Insurance Program, that it exercises the option that the federal government allows for undocumented immigrants. These are basically an undocumented pregnant woman who would give birth in a hospital. By federal law, emergency Medicaid has to actually pay for those costs. And so what this does is we actually have the states have the option to move those costs and provide prenatal care to the women before the birth, since the child actually will be born and then, of course, qualify for either Medicaid or the Children's Health Insurance Program. It actually results in a net savings because shifting these costs from Medicaid to the Children's Health Insurance Program, it has actually a higher match rate than Medicaid. So it actually generates a net savings, which I'll talk about in just a little bit. And then there's also 650 additional waiver slots that are funded for 10.8 million. This increases the second year amount to 1,200 slots. So this will actually help continue to move toward reducing the waiting list for those services. And there was also an auxiliary grant rate increase that was included as well. Moving to slide 33, just other spending. I won't go into great detail, just a few things. Some of these are more administrative in nature where we reduce some of the cost. There's also an increase in TANF cash assistance, which is something the committee's been doing in recent years because the levels have been relatively low, and some additional funding, about $800,000, to continue funding the Emergency Department Care Coordination Program, which basically links all the ERs in the state so that providers and health plans can actually figure out when people that they serve actually are showing up in the ER and to try to give them access to services to reduce their unnecessary ER utilization. Moving to slide 34, just other spending. So this covers a variety of things. These are smaller amounts. Some of these are tied to legislation passed by the Senate that had a fiscal impact, such as the bill related to confirmatory adoptions, the digital equity pilot program, as well as orientations for personal care aides. And you can see some other smaller items that are also funded there. On slide 35, HHR, so this slide just totals up all the restorations for HHR. You can see that the governor had restored over 24 million, and the committee recommends storing another 15 million for things like about 3.8 million for pilot projects to reduce census pressure in the state psychiatric hospitals. This fully funds what the General Assembly had approved last year. The minimum salary adjustment for local social workers was also restored. Forensic discharge planning for inmates in jails for reentry, that was also restored, as well as some workforce programs to create a behavioral health loan repayment program and a nursing preceptor program that helps us support the healthcare workforce and the issues that the state faces there. So I won't go through all of those, as you can read them there, but that's that table reflects all the restorations. And then slide 36 covers the HHR savings actions, which I already talked about. You can see in Medicaid, there are lines too for the Children's Health Insurance Program. That basically you can see that most of the savings is, again, the public health emergency has been extended, and basically under the new administration, guidance was given, and CMS provided guidance to all states that the public health emergency will likely be extended to the end of the current calendar year, and that actually allows the state to pick up savings basically for every quarter through the end of this year. And you can see those amounts there as well. And the healthcare fund, there was a one-time additional cash that committee could pick up of $39 million. It's a payment from a non-participating manufacturer related to the master settlement agreement for tobacco that the Office of the Attorney General had negotiated. So that money comes in the first year and can be picked up and it offsets Medicaid cost. There's also the phase in the behavioral health redesign that saves about $10 million. So the delay in that, because of the pause in funding for it, actually results in some savings until the actual redesign of those Medicaid services gets off the ground. And you can also see there's also federal foster care match savings in the Title IV program, which is also the enhanced federal match also applies to that program as well. And then moving to slide 37, I won't go. This is just a sample of some of the language amendments in HHR. There are more than this, but there are things like improving oversight of the Children's Services Act. Those come from JLARC recommendations from the report they did back in November, as well as directing merger of the two Medicaid managed care programs to have one combined managed care program for the Commonwealth in Medicaid. So with that, Madam Chair, that concludes HHR unless there are any questions.
Are there any questions for Mike? Senator Favola.
I apologize, but my question relates to the increase in the auxiliary grant. Does that increase apply to individuals who are only in assisted living facilities, or could it apply to individuals in supportive housing or in other venues?
Madam Chair, Senator Favola, it would actually apply to other venues, including supportive housing. The code actually, when that was amended to add supportive housing a few years ago, it kind of defines who's included in that group. So that rate applies to all settings.
Any further question? Senator Peterson.
Mike, I see one of the bullet points on page 37 is merger of the two Medicaid managed care programs. Can you just give a little bit of detail on that?
Sure. Virginia has had Medicaid managed care since the 1990s, and It started really as the program for the children's, which is, you know, children's health care is a lot simpler than like the long-term care side of the world. A few years ago, Virginia actually started a separate program that covers long-term care. So people in nursing facilities, people at home that need to be supported, much more expensive population. So we finally expanded, but they kind of did it separately.
Is that called the Gold program or?
Well, there's the original program for children is called the Medallion program.
Okay.
And so the long-term care one is called the Commonwealth Coordinated Care Plus program.
CCC Plus.
Yeah, CCC Plus. So the idea here is, and last year the General Assembly had directed DMAS to do a report to look at this, because it's been a discussion point for years. Do you have to have completely two separate programs? The same 6 managed care companies actually provide service, or the same 6 in both of them. So combining them together, you already have the same 6 vendors. So that's not a big change. It's really just, to some degree, more the administrative back end of it, of consolidating it. And that report did recommend merging them together.
All right, thanks.
Any other question? Not seeing any. Next up is Public Safety and Veterans.
Still me, Senator Howe.
Oh, it's still you? Okay.
I'm the temporary public safety analyst. So Public Safety and Veterans Affairs, you can look moving to slide 39. This is just, again, the table overview of public safety. There weren't a lot of significant changes from a funding perspective. You can see about $42 million in savings in the first year, and I'll talk about that in a second, and then $3.4 million additional funds in the second year. But moving to slide 40, in the Department of Emergency Management, this is where the largest amount of money in the governor's budget came from, was $78.9 million for basically the COVID-19 response from the Department of Emergency Management and what they've been involved with. And so what has actually happened since they introduced the budget is the federal government, FEMA, has given the state reimbursement for some of previous expenditures that we had made. The state had actually paid for those out of CARES Act funds, and so essentially what it does is by receiving this money, it frees up those CARES Act funds to then be used, in this case, for the COVID-19 response, so we can supplant that $42 million. So there's still $78.9 million budgeted for this. It's just the first year amount is funded from the federal government. On the next line, you can just see the only other major spending item in emergency management was that the committee recommends was to continue funding the Emergency Shelter Assistance Grants Program, which was created by the General Assembly last year. And this actually sustains that funding on an ongoing basis at $2.5 million per year. So moving to slide 41, the Department of Corrections. To note a few things here, the committee amendments include expansion of sex offender treatment services by about $500,000. So this adds about 5 positions to kind of increase their ability to identify sex offenders who need treatment and to begin this. This actually stems from a report that the Secretary of Public Safety and Homeland Security did this past year to look at how do you improve those services. And the idea behind this is to try to make sure that you can potentially conditionally release these individuals as opposed to sending them to be committed to the Virginia Center for Behavioral Rehabilitation, which is a much more expensive place to treat them. So there's also funding for the Corrections Special Reserve Fund. These are the Woodrum amendments. There were 7 bills passed by the Senate that actually covers that. So those are funded. There's $250,000 to expand video visitation for inmates to connect with their families and loved ones. There's it's actually $160,000 for the Board of Local and Regional Jails based upon legislation to expand their authority over the Department of Corrections. And then also another bill related to kind of isolated confinement, the idea of having them to conduct a review and figure out what it would cost to implement that legislation. So moving to slide 42 in the Department of State Police, the large item here, which is non-general funds, is funding the State Police Compensation Plan. This is in accordance with the Senate bill that passed that basically increases the vehicle registration fee by $4. So that would generate $28.5 million for them to fund that plan. There's the committee actually recommends reducing the introduced budget, included $9.5 million for vehicle replacement for the state police. So the fundamental issue here is that Ford will no longer be making the sedans. So they've ultimately determined to use the Ford SUV as their vehicle going forward. The savings here from the committee is just reflecting that they wanted to reduce the replacement cycle to every 100,000 miles versus the traditional 130,000 miles. So the $2.3 million savings just kind of keeps them in that same replacement cycle of 130,000. There's also $1.1 million for drug recognition expert training. So this is kind of tied to the marijuana legislation too, that to help support efforts to train law enforcement to be able to determine whether or not people are driving under the influence of drugs. There's also 5 positions at $500,000 for cold case investigators at the state police, and then a couple of language amendments as well. So moving to slide 43, the only other thing to note in all the other public safety agencies was in the parole board, and this is related to a committee amendment to fund legislation that was passed that basically requires public reporting of member votes on parole hearings. Then moving to slide 44, just the other things to note in public safety with related to the ABC authority. There was proposed language in the introduced budget to create the treasury loan related to the marijuana legislation, but since that's going to be in a separate agency, that was deleted. There are also recommendations to increase the net profits transfer by $20 million in the first year to the general fund and then $1.7 million in the second year based upon their most recent sales. And then an increase in ABC costs related to increase in law enforcement for the direct shipment of alcohol. And lastly, there are 2 language amendments in public safety and homeland security related to evaluating funding for enforcement of controlled substances to see if any of that money can be redirected to other activities, as well as a more thorough review of all the systems and processes for expungement to try to better isolate the true cost of legislation that impacts that. Moving on to slide 45, in Veterans and Defense Affairs. Again, there's only 2 amendments to Veterans and Defense Affairs, so we can move to slide 46. Essentially, there was a bill passed by the Senate related to liaison with military spouses to fund that position. So there's $147,000 for that in Veteran Services. And then lastly, there's language that reallocates existing funding in their budget that would be used for another military liaison position. It's related to funding that was for a Department of Defense grant that they no longer have to match because it ended. So that's just redirecting that funding to this other position. So with that, Madam Chair, that concludes both Public Safety and Veterans Affairs.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Mike? Not seeing any. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Next is Agriculture and Forestry. Jason?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members, turn to the next slide. There were 4 cash amendments in the Secretariat of Agriculture and Forestry that essentially resulted in shifting the net position from $300,000 in the second year to $300,000 in the first year. Turning to the next slide, those 4 actions in brief were trimming $100,000 from a proposed new fund, the Agriculture Food Assistance Program, providing $500,000 for that program. Midway through the line, or through the chart, the committee recommends restoring funding for the Holiday Lake 4-H repairs. It's the Holiday Lake 4-H Center in Appomattox, as well as restoring funding for international marketing at the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. The subcommittee also recommends reducing or eliminating a new multi-agency incident response team that was in partnership with the Department of Emergency Management. Shifting to the next slide, there's one major language amendment included at the Department of Charitable Gaming, or at the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, related to the Division of Charitable Gaming. The committee recommends directing the Office of the State Inspector General to review by December 1st the regulatory structure of charitable gaming in Virginia to include current permitting requirements and exemptions, net revenue dedicated to charitable activities, and the types of activities and gaming revenue that is excluded from the calculations of net profits, charitable gaming occurring in locations that are not located in the same jurisdiction as the registered address of the charitable organization, enforcement of social quarters and members and guest limitations, the structure of the charitable gaming board, including any changes needed to prevent conflicts of interest, the adequacy and enforcement of resources dedicated to the oversight activities of the Office of Charitable and Regulatory Programs, and whether regulation of charitable gaming would be more appropriately vested with the Virginia Lottery. Those are the 5 amendments for agriculture and forestry, Madam Chair.
Any questions?
Turning to natural resources. Picking up on the next slide, similar to agriculture and forestry, the collective committee recommended amendments for the Office of Natural Resources reduce total biennial spending by about $2.7 million from Senate Bill 1100 as introduced. Turning to the next slide, I'd like to point out about 5 items on this slide where the committee has recommended changes. Specifically, with respect to the restoration of Chickahominy tribal lands, the committee recommends eliminating $3.5 million in general funds and authorizing the Virginia Land Conservation Foundation to consider land from its existing base appropriation of $10 million to consider projects which may be best suited for restoration of Chickahominy tribal lands. In addition, that language authorizes the Virginia Land Conservation Foundation to consider providing funding for the preservation of River Farm as well. On the following line, with respect to Project Harmony, the committee recommends providing $1 million for Project Harmony for the removal of the tombstones and the repatriation of them at the cemetery in Maryland. Halfway down the page, the committee recommends providing $1.4 million in the first year for capital improvements to the Rhododendron Lodge at Breaks Interstate Park. Similarly, the committee recommends providing $1.5 million for connection of Mason Neck State Park to public water supply. There are two restorations that the committee recommends at the Department of Conservation and Recreation, which includes restoration of $740,000 for Riverfront Park in the city of Danville, and about $200,000 for environmental literacy. Next slide, please. At the Departments of Environmental Quality, Historic Resources, and Marine Resources Commission, the committee recommends an additional $300,000 to fund legislation passed by the Senate, as well as maintaining $12 million in restorations at the Department of Environmental Quality with a focus on staffing environmental regulatory and outreach programs. The committee recommends restoring $300,000 in base operations support at the Department of Historic Resources and $250,000 at the Department of Historic Resources to establish a new partnership for a paid internship program between the Department of Historic Resources and Virginia's historically black colleges and universities. Turning to the next slide. With respect to water quality, the committee endorses the governor's proposal to provide a total of $35 million in agricultural best management practices. That would be $24.5 million inside the Chesapeake Bay watershed and $10.5 million outside of the Bay watershed. Additionally, the committee amendments endorse $4.4 million in complementary water quality programs at different agencies, such as the Department of Forestry for Trees for Clean Water and at the Department of Health for the identification of septic system hotspots. Turning to the next slide. As I'd previously mentioned, there's language directing the Virginia Land Conservation Foundation to reserve up to $5 million for considerations of projects that conserve tribal lands of the Chickahominy for the preservation of River Farm. There's language establishing a work group focused on reducing the sale of invasive plant species in retail landscaping, greenhouse, and nursery industries. And there's the recommendation of $1.3 million in non-general funds in capital outlay for additional acquisitions of state park and natural area preserves. These are again limited to in-holdings and contiguous properties of existing state parks. On the next slide, there are a few other language recommendations. For example, the committee recommends language to direct the review of nutrient credit trading on lands that are currently in agricultural production. Recommends a multi-agency task force to review harmful algae blooms in partnership between DEQ, VDACS, and the Health Department. And it reverses the recommended language in the introduced budget to re-implement a 5% water quality enhancement fee, as well as retains the existing hydrofluorocarbon regulatory requirement language that was agreed to during the special session. Finally, the committee does establish a stakeholder work group to assess the cost and benefits of access permit fees paid by boat ramps operated by Department of Wildlife Resources and proposes a one-year pause on the implementation of a user fee that was approved in legislation adopted last year. Madam Chair, if there's no natural resources questions.
Are there any natural resources questions? Seeing none, transportation.
Yes, ma'am. Turning quickly to transportation, primarily the committee's actions reverse $55 million of general fund that was included in the introduced budget for major initiatives in passenger rail and multi-use bike and pedestrian trails, and instead appropriates $215 million in assumed revenues from federal funds that were passed in the highway or in the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act. Turning to the next slide. From that $215 million, the committee recommends $137.6 million to expand passenger rail services to the New River Valley, $40 million to both expand and enhance the safety and connectivity of the existing network of statewide multi-use trail facilities, $27.4 million to support critical public transit services that fulfill Virginia's obligation to Metro, as well as increase the availability of free or reduced fare public transit services across the state, and $10 million in partnership with Virginia Tech to support a 5G connected community redevelopment pilot project at the Virginia Tech campus in the city of Falls Church. Next slide, please. Several other smaller transportation proposals that were included in the introduced budget. The committee recommends endorsing language across multiple agencies to provide additional flexibility in response to the ongoing pandemic, especially at the Department of Aviation's and the Department of Motor Vehicles. It authorizes the transfer of a half-an-acre parcel of right-of-way in Norfolk, adjacent to I-264 to Norfolk Southern, and it recommends language in capital outlay to modify the bond proceeds supporting the Portsmouth Marine Terminal project in support of multiple offshore wind energy projects. And Madam Chair, that completes the transportation report.
Is there a question on transportation? I don't see any. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Next up is general government. Adam.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, general government, thank you. So, beginning with the legislative agencies, there's a language amendment that would direct the staff of the Senate Fiscal Office and Senate Finance and Appropriations to perform a comprehensive review of legislative assistant compensation and benefits, including looking at what other states provide and what could be considered best practices in terms of total compensation, and then deliver a report to the clerk of the Senate and chair of Senate Finance by November 1st of 2021. For the Division of Capitol Police, there's just under $850,000 provided for a targeted salary initiative that would increase the starting pay of officers from $42,750 to $49,000 following a graduation from the academy, and then provide $6,250 to all current officers to address compression, and increase the starting salary of communications officers from $31,000 to $37,000, and increase the salaries of wages and full-time and part-time support officers. There's $50,000 to begin the process of creating a memorial in tribute to the late Senator Yvonne Miller, and then there's language directing the Department of General Services to assist in this process. And there's just under $350,000 to establish a behavioral health commission consistent with SB 1273 of this session, or the 2021 session. And then there's $100,000 to fully fund the amount projected for intergovernmental dues. Next slide, please. Thank you. So moving into judicial, there's a language amendment that directs the Supreme Court to prepare and distribute evaluation forms in all circuit court cases that are overseen by a retired judge to collect data on the number of and types of cases referred to retired judges. There's $100,000 the second year to cover the costs for additional court-appointed experts associated with SB 1315. There's an additional $4.6 million between the Court of Appeals and the Indigent Defense Commission related to SB 1261, which expands the jurisdiction of the Court of Appeals. There's $3.2 million the second year to establish a new public defender office in Chesterfield County pursuant to SB 1442. And there are other related amendments that collectively cover the cost associated with the public defender office. Of these, there's a reduction of $1.1 million in criminal fund appropriation that reflects the estimated cost savings in court-appointed counsel. And there's also a $2.9 million reduction in the Indigent Defense Commission, which reflects a portion of the existing funding for the Capitol Defender Office, with the remaining $1.1 million of that being redirected into the agency's Criminal Indigent Defense Services program. For the Virginia State Bar, there's $1.5 million maintained for the restoration of previously unallotted funding for additional civil indigent defense housing attorneys. And then finally, there is $333,000 in the second year for costs associated with SB 1391 for the collection and reporting of pretrial data, which is a recommendation of the Virginia State Crime Commission. Next slide, please. Quickly going through the amendments for the executive offices, there's funding of $200,000 the second year maintained for a diversity and inclusion strategic plan. In the Office of the Attorney General, this reflects the bulk of the funding related to the Court of Appeals jurisdictional expansion bill, and is for an additional 61 staff members, and that would be for 48 attorneys and 13 support staff, primarily related to the office's responsibility for the preparation of all opposition briefing and criminal appeals associated with the provisions of the bill. Also, in the Office of the Attorney General, funding of about $250,000 was maintained for costs related to SB 1360, which would define sexual and workplace harassment as an unlawful employment practice. And then also funding of $25,000 was maintained to establish an LGBTQ advisory board. Next slide, please. Going into administration, there's a total of $11 million that was provided for the restoration of prior unallotments in the compensation board, including funding for various constitutional offices, such as additional staffing for sheriffs and Commonwealth attorneys' offices, salary adjustments for regional jail officers and circuit court clerks, and enhancements to the automated protective order notification system, or SAVIN. There's also some additional funding related to system changes to the Constitutional Officer Information Network, or COIN system, in the comp board, as well as funding to address the increase in the minimum wage for part-time staff. There's $250,000 a second year related to SB 1226, which would fund a comprehensive study by the National Center for State Courts to look at additional metrics and workloads, including in-court obligations such as the use of diversion programs and specialty dockets related to funding for the Commonwealth's attorney's offices. There's also language directing the comp board to survey sheriff's offices to determine anticipated staffing and training associated with the development of the Mental Health Awareness Response and Community Understanding Aid Services, or Marcus Alert System. And there are language amendments that would adjust the marriage and divorce filing fees and dedicate additional revenues for circuit court clerk compensation. There's funding of about $700,000 for DHRM's Learning Center and Recruitment Management Systems. There's a language amendment that would direct DHRM to establish a return-to-work policy for state government, as well as to look at the tools and methodologies used to accommodate expanded telework during the pandemic and how that may inform future policy objectives in that area. And there is $16.7 million that was maintained that was in the introduced budget related to the replacement of the VERA system. And that would also incorporate about $12.2 million that the agency currently has, so the system would be about $29 million to replace. Restores $2.5 million to fully fund the cost of general registrar and electoral board salaries for localities. And finally, there's a language amendment that would require V to report annually on the adequacy of the state's network infrastructure, and that is a JLARC recommendation. Next slide, please. Moving into finance, the budget maintains the $100 million deposit to VRS, which accelerates the payment on the remaining balance from the teacher retirement plan of $61.3 million, and deposits the rest of the $38.7 million, or of the $138.7 million, in the state retiree health credit program. And the $650 million voluntary deposit, the revenue reserve, is also maintained in the budget. There's a language amendment that would establish a special non-reverting opioid abatement fund. So this is similar to what was created under SB 1469. And this is to receive any settlement money that comes to the Commonwealth through the OAG related to opioid lawsuits prior to the fund being established July 1. So there's a place to park that money and actually earn a return on it while we're holding on to it prior to the effective date. And that there's language that would transfer that funds effective July 1. There's an amendment that removes about $235,000 related to the Department of Taxation making system changes for the Virginia Facilitated Enrollment Program, given that there's presently no legislation on the Senate side that would necessitate it. The budget maintains $49.8 million in debt service savings, and there is an amendment in the Treasury Board that would provide $4 million in the first year to begin the defeasance of the outstanding bonds on the Central Virginia Training Center. Next slide, please. Closing out with central appropriations and then a Part 4 amendment. So for employee compensation, the amendment would add $20.3 million above what was included in the introduced budget to provide a 3% raise for state and state-supported local employees effective September 1st of 2021. And it includes language excluding higher education presidents and executive officers, administrators, or faculty making in excess of $150,000 per year. Also included is $35 million to reflect the costs associated with marijuana and expungement legislation, as well as $3.5 million for the initial operating costs of the Virginia Cannabis Control Authority, which would be distributed upon determination of the Secretary of Finance and the advice and consent of the Director of the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. $11.8 million total is provided for the inauguration and transition offices, the Emancipation and Freedom Monument, and then the Slavery and Freedom Heritage Site, which accounts for $9 million of that total. For the Slavery and Freedom Heritage Site, there's language that would unallot the funding until the City of Richmond provides detailed planning information, which would be subject to approval by the Secretaries of Finance and Administration, at which time DPB would unallot those funds and make them available to the city. So there's a total of about $500,000 for two workers' compensation bills, SB 1275 and 1375, which add EMS workers to the presumption as a local option and also provide for COVID-19 as a presumption prospectively. There's also a language amendment that will require the governor to fund in FY22 in descending priority order one-time deposits to certain areas contingent upon FY21 revenues exceeding the budgeted forecast. This would include $47.2 million for an additional SOQ support position, $20 million to increase DD waiver provider rates to reflect the minimum wage increase, and $200 million to the VRS Trust. Additionally, there's language in Part 4 related to redistricting that directs the chairs of the commission to share information regarding the status of census data, options for redistricting, and impacts on forthcoming elections, and would also establish parity for legislative and citizen members of the commission for daily compensation and meeting attendance and costs set at the regular rate for legislative members. And Madam Chair, that concludes general government. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Adam. Any questions?
Madam Chair, this side.
Senator Obenshain.
Madam Chair, if I can ask Adam, if you'd take a look at page 65, the executive offices, the OAG, workplace sexual harassment. I don't see a Senate Bill 1360. What is that?
That is, I believe that.
Is that Senator McClellan's bill?
Yeah, that bill was not passed.
That was defeated on the floor on Friday?
Okay, well, the budget, then disregard that one, sir.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. The language of the bill isn't in the budget, is it?
I don't think that language is actually in the budget. I think it was in the presentation, but it's not in the
Madam
budget.
Chair, Senator Obenshain, this just reflected the cost associated with the bill. It may have had the clause on it, but I don't recall, but it was funded nonetheless in the budget. Or it's not.
One other question, if you don't mind. On page 66, the general registrar salary reimbursement, I know that there was some move a year or so ago to raise general registrars' salaries to the same level as constitutional officers. That's not what this is it?
Madam Chair, Senator Obenshain, no, this would actually increase to 100% the amount that goes to localities related to the prescribed salary for those.
All right, thank you very much.
Further questions? Not seeing any. Thank you, Adam.
Madam Chair, I was just going to add, any bill that was defeated, the savings will fall to the bottom line. So, to Senator Obenshain's question.
Okay, next is capital outlay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Wrapping up with capital outlay on slide 70. There were a few proposed actions in the introduced budget related to capital outlay, and similarly a relatively few number of committee amendments in this area. You see that the introduced budget proposed increasing all funds by a total of $219 million, and the committee amendments do reduce that amount on a net basis. There's an increase of general funds of $47.3 million, primarily from the addition of $37 million general funds to reduce the amount of maintenance reserve that is funded with debt, instead funding it with this cash, and then also about $10 million general funds for restoring planning for a few projects. The primary reason for the reduction in the tax-supported bonds is by maintaining the Senate's position with regard to the size of the replacement of Central State Hospital at 252 beds. The committee's amendments do endorse the planning funds to replace the Supreme Court building. This involves demolishing the Pocahontas building ultimately after it is vacated and anticipated to be complete in 2029, as well as replacement of a DGS state office building. This would be on the site of the former VEC building at 7th and Main with a larger building, although smaller than the Monroe building that it would be replacing, anticipated to be finished in the spring of 2026. The amendments and the introduced budget, again, primarily focus on infrastructure projects and life safety. The committee adds one related to James Madison University for a steam plant. And there are several non-general fund cash amendments that are endorsed, relatively small amounts, and the committee adds one for an outdoor project at the Science Museum. There are several language amendments, including one related to Virginia Commonwealth University acquisition of the ABC warehouse property related to the 2019 plans. VCU has submitted their master plan for the athletics village and received the 2 appraisals, and this language indicates that the sale would be based on the lower of those 2 appraisals. Jason already mentioned language related to Portsmouth Marine Terminal potential projects. And finally, there is amendment to clarify the authorization for Norfolk State University and Virginia State University to be able to access the federal HBCU capital outlay program. The last 3 slides are just included for your reference. You have seen them before, and there are a few changes. And again, they're mostly focused on infrastructure, life safety, and the non-general fund cash projects. And Madam Chair, that completes capital outlay and the whole presentation.
Is there any question for capital outlay? Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
And thank you to the whole staff for your presentations. As always, it's sort of overwhelming, but you do a really good job explaining it, so thank you. I'd like to call the Senate Finance Committee to order. We will be taking up the marijuana bill, and that's the only business we're about to have. Clerk, could you call the roll?
Senator Saslow? Senator Norman? Senator Hanger? Senator Lucas? Senator Newman? Senator Ruff? Senator Vogel? Senator Barker?
Here.
Senator Edwards? Senator Deeds? Senator Locke? Senator Peterson? Senator Marsden? Senator Eben?
Here.
Senator McClellan? Senator Howell?
Here.
Madam Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Let's see, House Bill 2312 has arrived at our bailiwick, and it has been conformed to the Senate bill. So what we would like to do is just pass it out. Senator Deeds.
Second.
It's been moved in Senate, seconded that House Bill 2312 be reported. Any discussion? Okay, all in favor? Can we record our votes?
Yes, ma'am.
Record your votes.
It's voice vote.
No.
I'll call the roll.
He's going to call the roll.
Senator Saslow? Senator Norman? Senator Hanger? Senator Lucas?
Aye.
Senator Newman? Senator Ruff? Senator Vogel? Senator Barker? Senator Edwards? Senator Deeds? Senator Locke? Senator Peterson? Senator Marsden? Senator Eben? Senator McClellan? Senator Howell?
Aye.
Ayes 13, noes 3.
Ayes 13, noes 3. House Bill 2312 is reported. There's no more business, is there?
That completes the docket, ma'am.
That completes the docket, so we will rise.
Eats. Madam Clerk, do we have any communication from the governor?
Yes, sir, we do. Dear Senator Stanley, we waited till you got your shot. It's been a long year. While we remain socially distanced, absence makes the heart grow fonder, as the poet once said. Happy Valentine's Day. Signed, Ralph S. Northam, Governor of Virginia. It is now communicated.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. For what purpose does the Senator from Franklin County, Senator Stanley, rise?
Oh, there's a lot of bad jokes in that one right there. Mr. President, I rise to thank His Excellency the Governor. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Make sure you tip your waitresses and waiters. I rise for an announcement.
Senator, has the floor.
No, I just want to announce that I want to thank His Excellency the Governor. We've had our ups and we've had our downs, but he's always been a great friend ever since I've been in the Senate, and I want to thank Governor Northam. And I'm teared up a little bit, or maybe that was the vaccine I just got. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank the Senator. Do any other senators wish to be recognized? Seeing none, the clerk will call the calendar.
Senate calendar for Friday, February 12th, 2021. Uncontested calendar, House bills on second reading.
Senior Senator from Fairfax, Senator Saslaw.
Mr. President, I move that all House bills on second reading on the uncontested regular calendar, that's pages 1 through 23, that's House Bill 1790 through House Bill 2290, that the rules be suspended and the second constitutional reading of the titles be dispensed with.
Thank the Senator. Question is, shall the rules be suspended in the second reading of the titles of the House bills on the uncontested and regular calendars, pages 1 through 23, House Bill 1790 through House Bill 2290, be dispensed with? All in favor of the motion will record their vote aye. Those opposed, no. Are the senators ready to vote? Have all the senators voted? Do any senator desire to change their vote? The clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 39, noes 0.
Ayes 39, noes 0. The reading of the titles is dispensed with. Senior Senator from Fairfax, Senator Saslaw.
Mr. President.
Senator from Southern Fairfax, Senator Barker.
Yes. There is a one bill in that block that we just dealt with. It's House Bill 2166 that I would like to, in essence, get out of the block and get it re-referred to Finance and Appropriations. Would now be the time to do that?
Yes. Which bill and which page, Senator?
It's page 12, House Bill 2166.
House Bill 2166 on page 12.
We can take this. We can take.
Senator from James City County, Senator Norman.
Thank you, Mr. President. With absolutely no malice in brain or heart, if you would take House Bill 1918 on page 7 out of the block and bye for the day.
Okay. Can it go by for the day in the block when we get to that motion?
That's what I was going to move, that the bills.
Because I'm told we amend on third reading for House bills.
Yes, I am aware of that, sir.
Okay. So okay. Let's take those one at a time. I would take the Senator from Southern Fairfax, Senator Barker. Let's take his motion first with regard to House Bill 2166 on page 12. And the Senator, you wanted that taken out of the block and to go by for the day?
No, I want it taken out of the block and be referred to the Senate Committee on Finance and Appropriations. Senate Finance and Appropriations.
So without objection, House Bill 2166 will be removed from the block. The question is, shall House Bill 2166 be re-referred to the Committee on Finance and Appropriations? All in favor of the motion will say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The bill is re-referred to the Committee on Finance and Appropriations.
Thank you.
Senator from James City County, Senator Norman.
Thank you. Yielding to the importance of the clerk, I will withdraw my request.
Thank the Senator. Without objection, the motion is withdrawn. Senior Senator from Fairfax, Senator Saslaw.
Mr. President, I would now move that those said bills go by for the day.
Thank the Senator. Question is, shall the House bills on the uncontested and regular calendars now on third reading go by for the day? All in favor of the motion will say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The bills will go by for the day.
Uncontested calendar, Senate bill on second reading. Senate Bill 1100, a bill to amend and reenact Chapter 1289 of the 2020 Acts of Assembly as amended by Chapter 56 of the 2020 Acts of Assembly Special Session 1, which appropriated funds for the 2020-2022 biennium and provided a portion of revenues for the 2 years ending respectively on the 30th day of June 2021 and the 30th day of June 2022. Reported from the Committee on Finance and Appropriations with amendments.
The Senate calendar having been completed, Senate Bill 1100 under special and continuing order will be taken up. Senator from Northern Fairfax, Senator Howe.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd just like to briefly go over the procedure for today for the budget bill. It's something we only do once a year, so we may have forgotten some of this.
Senator's the floor.
The clerk staff has prepared a list of out-of-block amendments that she will read, but you also have them listed on your green sheet of paper on your desk. The two caucuses will have an option to recess, to meet and review any amendments they want to make, and as they return from their caucus, items can be added to this green list. Then we will vote on the committee amendments in a block. Then we'll take up the out-of-block amendments from the list one by one. Then we'll take up any floor amendments, and then we'll dispense with the constitutional third reading and debate and pass, hopefully pass, the budget. And that is the plan right now. And if the clerk could read, please, the list on the green sheet that we have in front of us, just so everybody's totally aware.
Madam Clerk.
These are budget amendments requested out of the block. Page 3, item 9, number 1. Page 6, item 40, number 1. Page 6, item 41, number 1. Page 7, item 42, number 1. Page 7, item 43, number 1. Page 8, item 48, number 2. Page 8, item 48, number 3. Page 9, item 57, number 1. Page 10, Item 73, number 1. Page 10, item 73, number 2. Page 15, item 105, number 1. Page 16, item 112, number 1. Page 16, item 112, number 2. Page 23, item 130, number 1. Page 24, item 130, number 2. Page 25, item 135, number 1. Page 26, item 135, number 2. Page 48, item 196, number 1. And page 115, item 356, number 4, has been requested to stay in the block.
Okay.
Senator from Northern Fairfax, Senator Howe.
I've just been informed that neither caucus needs to meet, so we will move on. Are there any other items to be added to the out of the block? Okay, not seeing any. Then I believe the motion will be that we vote on the committee amendments that are in the block.
Correct. That's it. Thank the Senator. The question is, shall the committee amendments in the block that are uncontested be agreed to? All in favor of the motion will say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The committee amendments in the block that are uncontested are agreed to.
And next we will take up the amendments that are out of the block one by one.
Page 3, item 9, number 1.
Senator from Fairfax City, Senator Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm going to take it upon myself as the chair of this subcommittee to explain this amendment. Item 9, number 1, is $50,000 general fund money that we have set aside to the Martin Luther King Memorial Commission, and the purposes of this money is to plan a memorial in honor of our own late, great Yvonne Miller.
Thank the Senator. For what purpose is the junior senator from Chesterfield, Senator Chase, rise?
Thank you, Mr. President. Just a brief comment that I would like to make on this.
Senator's the floor.
I know that 2020 has been a difficult year for both sides of the aisle, and one of the things that concerns me is that we're starting to talk about memorials and statues and that type of thing, and while I have great respect for every person that's listed here, I just think that might be a topic that we want to stay away from, spending $50,000 dedicating memorial tributes to late senators and that type of thing. I think that might just be something that we need a cooling off period from here in the Commonwealth. And so for that reason, I'm going to vote no on this. Thank you.
What purpose is the senior senator from Richmond City, Senator McClellan, rise?
Thank you, Mr. President. Speaking to the item.
Senator's the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just to clarify, this is a memorial that will be not just to a former senator, but the first African-American woman elected to the General Assembly ever. And monuments and memorials reflect and should reflect a true and accurate and complete history. The money that is appropriated is to allow the Department of General Services and the Commission to begin the RFP process and for DGS to project manage this project. The memorial itself will be paid for through private funds and grants. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank the Senator. For what purpose is the senator from Southern Fairfax, Senator Barker, rise?
Mr. President, to address the item here.
Senator's the floor.
Mr. President, members of the Senate, when I first was dealing with the General Assembly, long before I even ran in the first place, much less got elected, back in the 1980s, I worked with a couple of different study commissions. And in Yvonne Miller's first year here, she was on one of those study commissions. And it was clear that she was someone who had worked very hard and accomplished a lot in her life, and that she had a type of knowledge and the ability to work with people to get things done. I have in my office in the Pocahontas building a picture of Yvonne Miller right now. She was a tremendous person who overcame a lot in her lifetime and did a lot of things for other people, and I think it's very fitting to have this memorial for her.
Thank the Senator. For what purpose is the junior senator from Chesterfield, Senator Chase, rise?
Thank you, Mr. President. While I respect the comments made by various senators on Senator Yvonne Miller, I would also bring up Eva May Scott, who was actually the first female senator in Virginia. And, maybe there should be consideration to having a memorial for her as well. And I just think that this is something that we need to take a closer look at. I have all due respect for everyone that has, mentioned their respect of Yvonne Miller, but I think there needs to be equal treatment of other senators, like the first female state senator, Eva May Scott, who I don't think was considered for this position. Thank you, Mr. President.
For what purpose, Senator from Franklin County, Senator Stanley, rise.
Thank you, Mr. President. Speak to the budget amendment.
Senator's the floor.
Mr. President, members of the body, maybe some of us have not had the true honor to have served with Senator Miller. I have. When I came to this floor 11 years ago, green, scared, in wonderment, she was as sweet as could be, sat right in front of me over to the right, as nice as could be, and actually laughed at my jokes. And I know she didn't think half of them were funny. But what I really remember about her was not just her love of the Senate and its traditions, but of our pages. She loved our pages, and they would surround her with love. And I think she called them her little babies or her lovelies. And she was just so wonderful with some of the brightest young men and women that we've had in the Commonwealth of Virginia come and serve in this wonderful page program that Madam Clerk has put forward. But, those are some of the great memories of my life, and I hope one day that I walk upon these grounds, and I'm honored to serve on the MLK Commission, and that we see that honor bestowed upon her, because she certainly bestowed an honor on me, which was the honor of friendship and guidance. And for those reasons, not only should this $50,000 be in, but we all together ought to raise at least another $50,000 or $100,000 privately through our own efforts to make sure that that hope of honoring Senator Miller becomes a reality. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank the Senator. For what purpose is Senator from Fauquier, Senator Vogel, rise?
Mr. President, speaking to the budget amendment.
Senator's the floor.
I just wanted to make the observation, Mr. President, that it is one of the great opportunities that we have as members of this body to exercise our discretion, to allocate resources when we have the opportunity for memorials in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And in this case, there are private funds that will be raised for this memorial. But more importantly, there will come a later time in this budget when we will have the opportunity to vote for resources that will be allocated for another person who, much like Yvonne Miller, had a tremendous impact on this body, and that was Senator Ben Chafin. And so I would hope that when this body exercises its discretion to honor members who have served, you may not have known them, but I can certainly tell you I knew Yvonne Miller, and there are few people in my life who interacted with me the way Yvonne Miller did, and who had more of an impact on me than Yvonne Miller did. And I can remember when my family, my dad in particular, came and visited the Senate, and he had such a long conversation with her, and he came home, and I think he probably talked about her more than any other member that he interacted with here, because she was so unique and so special and so different, and in my case, certainly never held back. And for that, Mr. President, I would say that it is absolutely an exceptional life that she lived, and an exceptional service that she made to the Commonwealth. And if it is our choice to memorialize her, then I think it is entirely appropriate that we do so in this budget. And I would say the same thing at a later time in this budget when we have resources that would recognize Senator Ben Chafin. And I just wanted to say they were both amazing people who served honorably.
Thank the senator. For what purpose does the senior senator from Fairfax, Senator Saslaw, rise?
Mr. President, members of the Senate, Madam Clerk and I were I think the only ones in this room who were here when Senator Miller arrived. And she's one of the, as Senator Stanley said, she's one of the nicest people you ever meet. No matter what somebody said that she may have vehemently disagreed with, that woman never had an unkind word for anyone. And if she heard somebody else say something, even if it was a correct remark, if it was in an unkind tone or an unkind word, Senator Miller would correct him, saying, you should not say that about some other person. And this is, talk about something that's entirely appropriate, it's this. So I would hope that we would have a unanimous vote for this. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank the senator. Senator, Junior Senator from Chesterfield, Senator Chase, having spoken twice, would need unanimous consent of the Senate to speak a third time. Does the senator wish to request it? All right. Senator from Fairfax City, Senator Peterson.
I move the amendment be adopted.
Thank the senator. The question is, shall the committee amendment be adopted? All in favor of the motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The committee amendment is adopted.
Page 6, item 40, number 1.
Senator from Fairfax City, Senator Peterson.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, item 40, number 1 is the expansion of the Court of Appeals. Basically, we are adding money to money that was originally introduced by the governor that would expand 6 new judges on the Court of Appeals. There is staff, a total of 27, and then eventually growing to 94 positions that will be allocated to this. That includes both, 27 staff positions prorated for 1 month, and then 25 positions going forward, including the judgeships, associated support, fixed costs. There's also costs that are related to the Indigent Defense Commission of $824,000, and then the Attorney General's office of $7.5 million. That's in FY22. I believe that's separate from this. This is just the Court of Appeals portion, which is $12.1 million.
Thank the senator.
Aggregate over 2 years.
Any other senators wish to be heard regarding the committee amendment? Seeing none, the question is, shall the committee amendment be adopted? All in favor of the motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The committee amendment is adopted.
Page 6, item 41, number 1.
Senator from Fairfax City, Senator Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. President. Item 41, number 1, is the establishment of a public defender's office in Chesterfield County, and I believe this portion has to do with this may have to do with the savings. I believe it is. It's a savings of $421,000 because we won't have to be paying for court-appointed costs. Rather, we will be establishing a new PD's office.
Thank the senator. For what purpose does the junior senator from Richmond City, Senator Morrissey, rise?
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, would the gentleman from Fairfax City rise?
Senator Yield.
Yes, sir.
Senator Yield, you have the floor.
With regard to the $421,000 in savings, there was a recent report, a recent report in the Richmond Times-Dispatch that discussed the fiscal year savings in 2019, that the Virginia Supreme Court paid with state funds $3.297 million for court-appointed attorneys in Chesterfield County. And in fiscal year 2020, due to the slowdown in pandemic, it was only $2.843 million. So my question is, why does it reflect only a $421,000 savings when it's approximately a $3 million a year savings?
Senator, the floor.
I'm going to defer to Servell because he's shouting at me and I can't hear. So if Senator from Eastern Fairfax would like to respond to that, I'll defer.
Senator from Eastern Fairfax, Senator Servell.
Thank you, Mr. President. We went through this in the Prince William system last year, but this is only for the circuit courts. There's also savings in General District Court and Juvenile Court, which are reflected in the amendments coming up. And I believe there might also be savings on the appellate side as well. So it comes out in different places of the budget.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank the gentleman.
Thank the Senator. Do any other senators wish to be heard regarding the committee amendment? Seeing none, the question is, shall the committee amendment be adopted? All in favor of the motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The committee amendment is adopted.
Page 7, item 42, number 1.
Senator from Fairfax City, Senator Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think this is exactly what Senator Servell just described. This is the 2 of 3 savings if you allocate between circuit, GDC, and juvenile court. So this would be the second of the 3 tranches of money we're going to save. So that's $486,000 allocated, I guess, to the GDC. I move the amendment.
Thank the Senator. Do any other senators wish to be heard regarding the committee amendment? Seeing none, the question is, shall the committee amendment be adopted? All in favor of the motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The committee amendment is adopted.
Page 7, item 43, number 1.
Senator from Fairfax City, Senator Peterson.
Okay, and so this is the third shoe to drop. This is the juvenile and domestic relations savings. So we will be saving $171,931 that we will not have to pay to court-appointed attorneys in Chesterfield County. I move the amendment.
Thank the Senator. Do any other senators wish to be heard regarding the committee amendment? For what purpose is the junior senator from Richmond City, Senator Morrissey, rise?
Thank you, Mr. President. I mean, I don't want to be a pest about this, and I understand there's savings as I see of almost $1.7 million, but I just want to read to you, the Virginia Supreme Court paid in state funds in the 3 courts, according to the executive secretary, $3.97 million in 2019, and according to the executive secretary in those same 3 courts in Chesterfield, $2.8 million. And the only reason I'm bringing it up, Mr. President, is I know that there's a budget amendment for the PD office that is approximately a little bit north of $3.1 million. And I've always been told, and the records from the Supreme Court support, that it's a bit of a wash. So I'm just wondering, and again, don't want to belabor it, but the numbers that come up here only don't come up to that total of $3 million. Where's the other $2 million gone?
Senator from Eastern Fairfax, Senator Servell.
Thank you, Mr. President. Speaking to the amendment.
Senator's the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I haven't been deeply involved in the Chesterfield situation, but I was involved in Prince William last year, and I think part of the reason the numbers in your head aren't matching with what's in the paper is because we're partly through the biennium, and the numbers that are in the budget reflect the numbers that occur when the office actually opens, which will probably be 4, 5, 6 months from now, which is towards the end of the biennium. And so the numbers you're looking at are for a full biennium, whereas these are just for the last 6 months of the biennium. So that's why. And there's also, when you open an office, there's setup costs associated with getting a lease and the furniture and the equipment, and they have to run a while without being able to recover any money while they train and things. We just went through that in Prince William right now before they're fully up to speed. And so the numbers don't always match right at the beginning, but eventually once the office is going full bore, it lines up. I move the amendment, Mr. President.
Thank the Senator. The question is, shall the committee amendment be adopted? All in favor of the motion will say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The committee amendment is adopted.
Page 8, item 48, number 2.
Senator from Fairfax City, Senator Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the amendment, and speaking to that,
Senator's the floor.
I think this goes exactly to Senator Morrissey's point. It talks about this is the $3.2 million to actually establish the public defender office in Chesterfield with 21 staff attorneys. And if you look at bullet point 2, it says the cost of opening the office is offset by a companion amendment that reduces by $2.9 million general fund in FY 2022 the appropriation. Oh, actually, that's for the Capitol Defender Office. Never mind. Okay, well, let me go back to my original point. This is a $3.2 million to establish the Public Defender's Office in Chesterfield County.
Thank the senator. Do any other senators wish to be heard regarding the committee amendment? Seeing none, the question is, shall the committee amendment be adopted? All in favor of the motion will say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The committee amendment is adopted.
Page 8, item 48, number 3.
Senator from Fairfax City, Senator Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. President. While I continue my tour across America, this is item 48, number 3. I move that it be adopted.
Senator's the floor.
This is also for the Court of Appeals expansion, and this will deal with the Indigent Defense Commission, which is to say the public defenders who will represent defendants on appeal, because now that they have appeal of right, we will need more lawyers to actually handle those appeals. This will add $824,000 and 8 full-time positions to the Indigent Defense Commission to handle those appeals of right. I move that the be adopted.
Thank the senator. Do any other senators wish to be heard regarding the committee amendment? Seeing none, the question is, shall the committee amendment be adopted? All in favor of the motion will say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The committee amendment is adopted.
Page 9, item 57, number 1.
Senator from Fairfax City, Senator Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the amendment be adopted.
Senator's the floor.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, this is then the flip side. If defendants have an appeal of right and we're hiring new lawyers in the Indigent Defense Commission, therefore we're going to need more folks with the AG's office to be on the prosecution side. So this adds, where's the number, 806,898 or 6 full-time attorney positions for that office. So I move that be adopted.
Thank the senator. Do any other senators wish to be heard regarding the committee amendment? Seeing none, the question is, shall the committee amendment be adopted? All in favor of the motion will say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The committee amendment is adopted.
Page 10, item 73, number 1.
Senator from Fairfax City, Senator Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. President. This was probably the most important matter we discussed in our subcommittee, and it may be the most important matter that comes before the body this year. We pulled in just a lot of different viewpoints, and it really comes down to how much should it cost to get married? I mean, how do you even calculate that amount? Where do you begin? I mean, what, you know, the emotional, the social, the political, the economic toll, how do we calculate? But to get a license, it's $50. $50. It was $35. We're moving it to $50. And yes, you can get them in bulk, but we decided not to do that this year, so just $50 for one license. And I move the bill pass.
Thank the senator. Do any other senators wish to be heard regarding the committee amendment? Seeing none, the question is, shall the committee amendment be adopted? All in favor of the motion will say I do. Those opposed will say no. The ayes have it. The committee amendment is adopted.
Page 10, item 73, number 2.
Senator from Fairfax City, Senator Peterson.
Mr. President, there are times when my children are around, I discuss subjects that I don't want them to hear, and sometimes I have to say earmuffs. So for those of you that think that sometimes every marriage has come to an end, or don't come to an end, earmuffs. But the question then becomes, if you do file for a divorce, how much should that cost? So we went back and forth, and we decided on 100. So 50 to get in, 100 to get out. I move that the amendment be adopted.
Thank the senator. Do any other senators wish to be heard regarding the committee amendment? Seeing none, the question is, shall the committee amendment be adopted? All in favor of the motion will say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The committee amendment is adopted.
Page 15, item 105, number 1.
Senator from Western Fairfax, Senator Marsden.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. Item 105, number 1, involves regulation of charitable gaming. It directs the Office of the State Inspector General to investigate the operations of the Charitable Gaming Board and recommend any changes needed to prevent conflicts of interest, including an assessment of whether responsibilities for the regulation of charitable gaming would be placed under the Virginia Lottery. The review will include current permitting requirements and exemptions, net revenue dedicated to charitable activities, and which types of gaming revenue is excluded from the calculation. Charitable gaming occurring in remote locations not located in the same jurisdiction as the registered address of the charitable organization. Enforcement of the social quarters and members and guests limitation. Structure of the Charitable Gaming Board, including any changes needed to prevent conflicts of interest. Adequacy of enforcement and resources dedicated to oversight activities of the Office of Charitable and Regulatory Programs, and whether regulation of charitable gaming should be more appropriately vested with the Virginia Lottery. And with that, Mr. President, I move that the amendment pass.
Thank the senator. Do any other senators wish to be heard regarding the committee amendment? Seeing none, the question is, shall the committee amendment be adopted? All in favor of the motion will say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The committee amendment is adopted.
Page 16, item 112, number 1.
Senator from Western Fairfax, Senator Marsden.
Thank you, Mr. President. Item 112, number 1, involves a shipping and logistics grant. The committee provides $6.3 million in the second year of the budget. On February 4th, 2021, Governor Northam announced that CMA CGM, which is a shipping and logistics supply chain company, will retain its North American headquarters in the city of Norfolk, including approximately 655 current employees, and will grow its presence in the Commonwealth, resulting in the creation of more than 400 new jobs in Hampton Roads and Northern Virginia. 2 days earlier, on February 2nd, the Major Employment and Investment Project Approval Commission endorsed a proposed incentive package for the company, including a customer performance grant totaling $9.5 million, subject to approval by the General Assembly. This amendment represents the first installment of that performance grant. And with that, Mr. President, I move that the amendment pass.
Thank the senator. Do any other senators wish to be heard regarding the committee amendment? Seeing none, the question is, shall the committee amendment be adopted? All in favor of the motion will say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The committee amendment is adopted.
Page 16, item 112, number 2.
Senator from Western Fairfax, Senator Marsden.
Thank you, Mr. President. This involves the governor's Motion Picture Opportunity Fund. The committee restores $1 million in FY 2022 for the governor's Motion Picture Opportunity Fund, the GMPOF. Chapter 1289, the 2020 Appropriations Act, included an additional $1 million in both FY 21 and FY 22 for the GMPOF. However, that additional funding was unallotted in Chapter 1289 and subsequently eliminated in Chapter 56. This amendment restores the second year of funding, which would increase the GMPOF funding from $3 million to $4 million in FY 2022. The GMPOF supports the film and videos industry in Virginia by providing grants for production companies and studios that produce projects in the Commonwealth using Virginia employees, resources, goods, and services. And Mr. President, it's hoped that a movie on the senior senator from Fairfax will be made. It will be a black and white movie in silence, in keeping with the years of his birth. And with that, I would move that the amendment pass.
Thank the senator. Do any other senators wish to be heard regarding the committee amendment? Seeing none, the question is, shall the committee amendment be adopted? All in favor of the motion will say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The committee amendment is adopted.
Page 23, item 130, number 1.
Senator from Western Fairfax, Senator Marsden.
Thank you, Mr. President. Item 130, number 1, is an increase of funding for the Virginia Talent Accelerator Program. The committee budget provides an additional $2.0 million general fund for the second year for the Talent Accelerator Program at the Virginia Economic Development Partnership. It is their number 1 priority. This amendment addresses the need to expand the custom workforce program's capacity to be more in line with the demand for service-based workforce incentives among competitive job creation projects considering Virginia. The custom workforce program is designed specifically to rapidly reskill an area's workforce to the extent requirements of a new or expanding employer and it is particularly impactful in rural areas where workforce concerns tend to be most acute. Workforce consistently ranks as the number 1 or 2 decision factor among competitive job creation projects. This additional money increases second-year funding from funding to $7 million for the, of general fund dollars. Funding will be used to increase the number of training, recruitment, and visual media development professionals on staff, enabling implementation of more products. And with that, Mr. President, I move that the amendment pass.
Thank the senator. Do any other senators wish to be heard regarding the committee amendment? Seeing none, the question is, shall the committee amendment be adopted? All in favor of the motion will say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The committee amendment is adopted.
Page 24, item 130, number 2.
Senator from Western Fairfax, Senator Marsden.
Thank you, Mr. President. Item 130, number 2, is support for the International Trade Plan. The committee budget provides $930,000 of general fund dollars the second year to implement provisions of the International Trade Plan for the Commonwealth of Virginia. The International Trade Plan was jointly developed in 2019 by the Virginia Economic Development Partnership, the Virginia Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, and the Port of Virginia, and other stakeholders. It lays out a plan to improve Virginia's trade position relative to other states, improving from 39th in exports per capita to 20th by 2030. The plan outlines 19 initiatives to expand Virginia's trade programs, resulting in an additional $18 billion in exports from Virginia, which would support 150,000 jobs. A key goal of the plan is to expand the number of companies utilizing VEDP's existing international trade programs and services. This amendment enables VEDP to expand the Virginia Leaders in Export Trade, it's called the Valet program, from 50 companies to 75 companies served, and enables the Commonwealth to capture up to $1 million in federal grant funding for export assistance. And with that, Mr. President, I move that the amendment pass.
Thank the senator. Do any other senators wish to be heard regarding the committee amendment? Seeing none, the question is, shall the committee amendment be adopted? All in favor of the motion will say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The committee amendment is adopted.
Page 25, item 135, number 1.
Whoops. I have just number 2. Could I suspend for just one moment to dig that up?
Sure. Senator from Western Fairfax, Senator Marsden.
Thank you, Mr. President. Item 135, number 1, provides additional support for CCAM. The committee provides an additional $1.4 million general fund the second year to support the Commonwealth Center for Advanced Manufacturing. This amendment provides an increase of $1 million general fund in rent, operating support, and maintenance for CCAM, bringing the total to $1.9 million in both FY 2021 and FY 2022. It includes increased flexibility on currently appropriated matching funds and provides an additional $400,000 in general fund resources for CCAM to attract federal funds for research projects to be conducted at CCAM. CCAM is an applied research center and not-for-profit with membership from industry, university, and government entities that allows collaboration among these groups. The structure enables members to save valuable resources by accessing pooled talent, tools, and technology to improve methodologies and increase product introductions. And with that, Mr. President, I move that the amendment pass.
Thank the senator. Do any other senators wish to be heard regarding the committee amendment? Seeing none, the question is, shall the committee amendment be adopted? All in favor of the motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The committee amendment is adopted.
Page 26, item 135, number 2.
Senator from Western Fairfax, Senator Marsden.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Virginia Nuclear Energy Consortium Planning Grant, item 135, number 2, the committee provides an additional $100,000 general fund the second year to the Virginia Innovation Partnership Authority for a planning grant to the Virginia Nuclear Energy Consortium Authority. This amendment provides funding for the VNECA to develop a proposal to create a nuclear research and innovation hub in Virginia. In creating this proposal, the VNECA is required to convene a work group that includes Department of Minerals, Mines, and Energy, the Virginia Economic Development Partnership, the Virginia Innovation Partnership Authority, Virginia Public Colleges and Universities, and relevant industry representatives. And I am assured, Mr. President, that this is a peaceful use of nuclear energy. And with that, I would move that the amendment pass.
Thank the senator. The question is, before we do that, does any other senator wish to be heard regarding the committee amendment? Seeing none, the question is, shall the committee amendment be adopted? All in favor of the motion will say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The committee amendment is adopted.
Page 48, item 196, number 1.
Senator from Hampton, Senator Locke.
Thank you, Mr. President. Item 196 addresses where the community will provide, the committee provides $568,000 general fund dollars for the University of Mary Washington's Workforce Development Initiative. This initiative partners 3 K-12 school districts, Stafford, Spotsylvania, and Fredericksburg, and Germanna Community College, which is a public liberal arts university, and industry, to develop a curriculum that accelerates time to degree. It lowers cost of attendance, eliminates the skill gap that exists between educational experiences and work, reduces the reliance on student loan debt to finance both degree competencies required to compete in the 21st century, and produces career-ready graduates whose experiences will empower both socially and economically into their futures. And this, Mr. President, is actually a restoration of funding that was originally approved in the 2020 regular session. And what this funding does is it provides for teacher training, for additional faculty and program support for this program. And with that explanation, Mr. President, I move that the amendment be adopted.
Thank the senator. Do any other senators wish to be heard regarding the committee amendment? Seeing none, the question is, shall the committee amendment be adopted? All in favor of the motion will say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The committee amendment is adopted.
That completes all the amendments that were taken out.
Senator from Northern Fairfax, Senator Howe.
Next, we would take up any floor amendments, but I would like to inquire of the clerk, are there any floor amendments?
No, ma'am.
Okay, good.
Thanks.
In that case, I will move that the rules be suspended and the third constitutional reading of the title of the bill be dispensed with.
Thank the senator. The question is, shall the rules be suspended and the third constitutional reading of the title of the bill be dispensed with? All in favor of the motion will record their vote aye. Those opposed, no. Are the senators ready to vote? Have all the senators voted? Do any senators desire to change their vote? The clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 39, noes 0.
Ayes 39, noes 0. The rules are suspended and the third constitutional reading is dispensed with. Senator from Northern Fairfax, Senator Howe.
I move that the bill pass, and speaking briefly to that.
I thank the senator. And before Senator goes on a very eloquent explanation of the passage of the bill, do you want to do any abstentions right now, or do you want to do them after?
Sure.
I didn't want to interrupt your flow.
Interrupt my flow.
Okay. Why don't we do abstentions now? Are there any senators who desire to abstain from any portion of the bill? Please ring in, and I will get around to each one of you. Senator from Portsmouth, Senator Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I am abstaining pursuant to Rule 36 on items 313, 313-4S, 320, number 1S, item 479.20, number 1S, and item 482.0. But I will be voting on the budget as a whole. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank the senator. The journal will so reflect. The senator from Prince William County, Senator McPike.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I'm standing pursuant to Rule 36 on items 385, 386, number 1S, and item C70, but voting on Senate Bill 1100 as a whole.
Thank the senator. The journal will so reflect. Senator from James City County, Senator Norman.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will be abstaining pursuant to Rule 36 on items 313 and on item 266, number 1, but we'll be voting on the bill as a whole.
Thank the senator. The journal will so reflect. Senator from Hampton, Senator Locke.
Thank you, Mr. President. I am abstaining pursuant to Rule 36 on item 303, but voting on Senate Bill 1100 as a whole.
Thank the senator. The journal will so reflect. Senator from Eastern Fairfax, Senator Surville.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm abstaining pursuant to Rule 36 on items 135, 374, and 374 number 3, but voting on Senate Bill 1100 as a whole.
Thank the senator. The journal will so reflect. Senior Senator from Virginia Beach, Senator DeSteff.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm abstaining pursuant to Rule 36 on item number 1051S, but voting on Senate Bill 1100 as a whole. Thank you.
Thank the senator. The journal will so reflect. Senator from Roanoke City, Senator Edwards.
Mr. President, I would like to note that I am abstaining pursuant to Rule 36 on item 266, number 1S, but am voting on Senate Bill 1100 as a whole.
Thank the senator. The journal will so reflect. Senator from Hanover, Senator McDougal.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I am abstaining pursuant to Rule 36 on item 214 1S, but voting on Senate Bill 1100 as a whole.
Thank the senator. The journal will so reflect. The senior senator from Richmond City, Senator McClellan.
Thank you, Mr. President. I am abstaining pursuant to Rule 36 on item 114, item 114 number 5, and item 47910, but voting on HSB 1100 as a whole.
Thank the senator. The journal will so reflect. Senator from King George, Senator Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm abstaining pursuant to Rule 36 on item 374, number 4S, but I'll be voting on Senate Bill 1100 as a whole.
Thank the senator. The journal will so reflect. Senator from Fairfax City, Senator Peterson.
Mr. President, I am abstaining pursuant to Rule 36 on item number 105, number 1S, and item number 266, number 1S, but voting on Senate Bill 1100 as a whole.
Thank the senator. The journal will so reflect. Do any other senators wish to register any abstentions? Seeing none, call the senator from Northern Fairfax, Senator Howe.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to move that the bill pass, and speaking briefly to that.
Thank the senator. You have the floor.
Thank you. As always, putting together the budget is really a job that has everybody involved. I'd like to especially thank the members of the committee who have devoted untold hours to this process. I also want to thank those members of the Senate who are not on the Finance and Appropriations Committee. They have given valuable input, and I hope we have listened to them sufficiently. And most especially, I want to thank our very special staff. There's nothing they can't do. There's no time you can't bother them and ask them to do it. They're truly extraordinary. This is just an important milestone in what is a long process. We have miles to go before the budget is finalized, but this is an important day, and I want to thank everybody for their participation. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank the senator. Do any other senators wish to be heard regarding passage of Senate Bill 1100? Seeing none, the question is, shall Senate Bill 1100 pass? All in favor of the motion will record their vote aye. Those opposed, no. Are the senators ready to vote? Have all the senators voted? Do any senators desire to change their vote? The clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 31, noes 8.
Ayes 31, noes 8. Senate Bill 1100 passes. Senior Senator from Fairfax, Senator Sasslaw.
Mr. President, I inquire of the clerk, does that complete the calendar for today?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Is there any other business to come before the Senate? Senior Senator from Fairfax, Senator Sasslaw.
Mr. President and members of the Senate, just a note that Mary Ann Horsch and Eric Blingham on the clerk's staff are having their birthday today. So wish them a happy birthday. And one other thing, I noted that the senator from Franklin said that he and the governor had their ups and downs, and I just wanted to assure him that he probably wasn't the only one. I think Mr. Otis may have had more ups and downs than he had. For most of you people who don't recognize that, he invented the elevator.
For what purpose is Senator from Fairfax City, Senator Peterson rise?
Mr. President, rise for an announcement.
Senator, is the floor.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, you will note in my hand checks that have been collected thus far. I have about 8, so that leaves, I got 9, okay? So even as we speak, the phones are ringing around me. Please bring a check next week, okay? I will find you, and thank you. This was not a staged, okay? Thank you, Louise. All right, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. For what purpose, Senator from Rockingham, Senator Obenshain rise?
Mr. President, brief point of personal privilege.
Senator, is the floor.
I guess the elevator thing was generational, so I apologize for not getting it. But over the course of the past year, I suspect that none of us have had more calls in our offices about anything more than unemployment benefits, okay? I cannot tell you the number of constituents in my district who languished waiting for the Virginia Employment Commission to process their claims for unemployment benefits. It was extremely frustrating. It was frustrating for them. It was frustrating for all of us who reached out and tried to help these constituents and seldom even got a return telephone call. Eventually, they have improved somewhat the system, but there are still a heck of a lot of people out there who are waiting for the help that they're entitled to under our unemployment compensation laws. I just saw, many of you probably just did, the article that was in the newspaper. I think the version that I saw came from the Richmond Times-Dispatch. Indicating that, much like California, Virginia has a horrible problem with payments that have been made to incarcerated inmates for unemployment claims that are just flat scams. 2 inmates made claims apparently in the amount of $51,000 that were processed, and Virginia paid out approximately $40 million in fraudulently applied for unemployment benefits to prisoners incarcerated in our prisons and jails. I certainly hope, given that it's Friday, that maybe the governor's office, the Virginia Employment Commission, and others might spend a little bit of time this weekend, especially as we are pushing our carefully crafted budget across to the other side, and theirs is headed our way, explaining to us, to the people across Virginia, how on earth this could have happened and what they're going to do to rectify this situation, get the train back on the tracks, and get these checks out to our constituents now.
Thank the Senator. Do any other senators wish to be recognized? Seeing none, the clerk will report any announcements on the desk.
Mr. Otis is hard to follow. Friday, February the 12th, 2021, the Commerce and Labor Subcommittee on Energy will meet immediately upon adjournment. West Committee Room, Senator Spruill, Norman, Newman, Lucas, and Marsden. Monday, February 15th, the Committee on the Judiciary will meet at 8 a.m. in the West Committee Room. The Local Government Subcommittee on Charters will meet at 8 a.m. in the East Committee Room. Senator Spruill, Pillion, Bell, Hashmi, and Kiggins. The Committee on Local Government will meet at 9 a.m. East Committee Room. The Democratic Caucus will meet 1/2 hour before session in the Democratic Caucus Room. The Republican Caucus will meet 1/2 hour before session in the Republican Caucus Room. And following up on the Massey Cancer Center fundraiser, the Senate Page Feed More fundraiser has reached their goal of $10,000 and gone beyond. So thank you for everyone who supported that project. It was just amazing the number of people, particularly the former pages and parents that we heard from. Now for the fund report. Weekend weather. There will be periods of snow and freezing rain across portions of the Commonwealth today, with some lingering activity possible. Another round of freezing precipitation is set to move in later tonight into Saturday. Sunday, winter weather will again come through the Commonwealth. Snow, sleet, and ice accumulations will be slightly higher. Travel will continue to be treacherous. So please drive safe and friendly, and happy Valentine's Day.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Is there any other business to come before the Senate? Seeing none, I call on Madam President, Senator from Portsmouth, Senator Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I move that the Senate do now adjourn until Monday, February 15, 2021. Have a good weekend.
What time do you want to come back, Senator?
12 o'clock noon would be great.
Sounds good. Question is, shall the Senate stand adjourned until Monday, February 15th at 12 noon? All in favor of the motion will say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The Senate stands adjourned until Monday, February 15th at 12 noon.